Wagwan, are you there? What's good? And you know who this is, baby. The #1 podcast in America, dedicated to all you kings and queens of color, homies and homettes, shotters, woo gals, G-boys, and charges. The one and only Jerk Jollof and Collard Greens podcast.
Wagwan, how you there? What's good? And welcome to the Jerk Jollof and Collard Greens podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Selassie, aka G Ransom, and I'm joined by none other than my brothers in bond, D Black, Francis, Chunky, and Dre, and we are the JJC Panel. Now, in today's episode, we'll be providing our take on a rather polarizing and sensitive topic, gun violence and civilian gun ownership in America today, and daring to answer the question, does America have a gun problem? But before we break the seal on this topic, we just wanted to provide a brief disclaimer regarding our sentiments on the issue. First, our deepest sympathies are extended to anyone that has been affected by or been a victim of gun violence. And we hope by having this discussion today, we are able to provide meaningful insight and varying perspectives on the matter. Lastly, while we certainly believe in protecting and upholding the civil liberties afforded to us as citizens of America, at no point should the ability of a people or persons to coexist peacefully be considered a privilege and no longer a right. So with that being said, let's start off with our wellness check, y'all. How are y'all doing today?
I'm good, bro.
Black, Francis, Chunky.
Yo, I'm here. I'm good.
I'm chilling.
Yeah.
This is going to be a crazy effing topic. So I can't.
Oh, I'm about to die.
Yo, I'm excited to hear what Chunky has to say about this one.
Are you sure?
Oh,
I got my end.
I wish we had the soundboards with the gunshots to let off in the air every couple of seconds.
I'm excited about this topic.
It's going to be good.
Yo, but I do have a very funny story about what happened to my wife and I. And it kind of relates to a gun. I was just thinking about it just now. And it's about me not having a gun. So me and my wife, we were laying in bed. This is like a couple of weeks ago, right?
Well, that's some kinky stuff. She want the gun in the bed.
Yeah.
What are you into?
Yeah, you never know. So we were laying in bed. It was like 11:30, 12 a.m. And we started hearing some random noise. And mind you, I live in a, I guess somewhat middle class neighborhood. So we don't really, I don't experience a lot. I wasn't really too nervous, but she keep looking at me like, you keep hearing that? You keep hearing that? And she somehow got in my head. So I got freaked out. So I was like, okay, I need to check this out. So I pulled my phone out and I looked at the camera in the living room that oversees the entrance of the door. I didn't see nothing, no motion detected. And I looked in my kitchen and there was nothing. So I got up, went to the main level. Then I need to go to the basement because I have 3 levels. We were on the top floor. Turned all the lights on. And in the kitchen, I was getting in my own head now. She already freaked me out. So, and I didn't realize my wife was watching me on camera. So I went in the kitchen, grabbed 2 knives, and I started out. Yo, you can see
one
me.
in each hand.
Yo, one in each hand, bro. I was like, I thought I was in an action movie. I was like edging the corners, like ha. And then
You ever heard the saying, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight?
Yo, that's I snuck all the way, tiptoe all the way down to the basement. And there was 2 things that was gonna happen. If somebody was there, I was gonna be shot. Or if there was no guns, I was like, we throwing this hand. So like, but I was like, it was so funny though. Then I went back upstairs acting like nothing just happened. And I went upstairs, I was like, yeah, nothing was there. I just looked. And she started laughing. And she was like, yo, I saw what you just did.
He's about to go kill Bill on somebody.
She was like, I saw you grab those knives, man. I was like,
real quick,
I was like, dang it.
If you don't, I highly suggest for you to invest in a shotgun, right? That's the best home defense weapon.
I know. I mean, that kind of tied back to like guns. I was like, man, if I had a gun, I'd definitely just grab that bad boy and go downstairs.
20 seconds. We had a similar issue. It was actually an earthquake, and this is how crazy I am, right? So I sleep with my shotgun underneath the bed. So
are you gonna shoot the earthquake?
I didn't know what it was. The bed shook. I got up, racked the shotgun, went downstairs, went to the front door, aimed it down. I was like, door's still locked. Huh? Guess it's nothing. Found out the next morning it was an earthquake, but I mean, I was ready to let one off, man.
I was like, yo, it was either we had a gun, we
shoot the
were throwing
ground. Be
hands,
quiet.
man.
But I mean, like, is that the best course? I'm not sure if you guys have ever experienced a break-in. I've experienced a break-in while I was in the home, and I can say, like, it was just a very unnerving experience. It's just the feeling that someone is basically entering, like, desecrating your domain, and the fact that we were all in the home when it happened is kind of like, okay, well, usually you want to break in when no one's home, steal the loot, make your way, but it made us kind of question this person's intention. And yeah, it's definitely a very unnerving experience. I'm not sure how a gun would have solved the issue in our case, but especially in this house full of Jamaicans.
Really quick, you have to have some type of mindset when you hear a shotgun get racked the first round to keep proceeding. So it's just a scare tactic to start off with, if anything.
All right, so we'll definitely get into that, but let's first get into our Black business shout out for the day. Today, Black business shout out goes out to Baby Steps Baby Box, which is a subscription and one-time baby box subscription service. Makes a perfect gift for first-time and expectant parents. Each box is filled with baby essentials and development tools based on the age of the baby. So definitely check them out at babystepsbabybox.com. And you can also check them out on Instagram and Facebook at babystepsbabybox. We'll drop a link to the website and our info for the episode. Also, shout out to Francine Thompson, founder and owner of the company. Be sure to look out for our one-on-one episode with her, where we get into more detail about how she was inspired to start the business and how you could also learn how to start your own subscription box service as well. So since you guys are so eager, let's go ahead and get into it then. Now, we all are aware that it's our constitutional right, at least it's documented that we have the right to bear arms. So getting into that actual text, which is not very self-evident as far as what it means. So we'll take it as you're afforded as an American citizen to have the right to bear arms. So just taking a look at our history with gun violence in this country and as a whole, do you feel, and I'll lead this off to Chunky, do you feel there's a problem with civilian gun ownership and or gun use in America? And if so, what do you think would be a worthy solution?
To be honest, there is a gun issue, right? So, and that issue is going to be subjective on my end. And a subjective issue that I have is just that people who own firearms have to understand they have a high level of responsibility, right? You're taught when you get your concealed carry permit for your pistol, you can't just brandish your weapon when you feel like it, right? That's just not a thing. You can't bring it into certain places. You have to be able to pass a course shooting at a target. When it comes down to having guns in America, I think everyone should be able to get a gun legally. I don't believe that the people who legally own a firearm are the majority of the problem, right? So there are people who have illegal firearms that do a lot of different things. So when it comes down to pistols or AR-10s or AR-15s, I believe the mitigating factor is just that if you live in a city, I don't see a problem with you having a pistol. Having an AR-10 or AR-15, that's where you get into the gray area. But let's take an entire state, for example, like New York State. You sometimes have the countryside. I believe that you can own an AR-10 or AR-15 out there. There's a lot of open space. You don't see that danger when you bring a long arm into a very densely populated area, let's say New York City, right? So everyone's different when it comes down to firearms. Me, I own firearms. I'm very responsible. If someone pisses me off, the first thing I think of isn't like, oh, let me reach for my weapon. It's like, how can I de-escalate this verbally? My firearm is basically for self-defense, right? If someone brandishes their firearm or presents to me as a threat, then yeah, I will fire a round into your chest or your face. But that's just self-defense. It's not a mechanism to instill fear into somebody. It's not a mechanism to coerce someone to do something. So when it comes down to the standpoint of firearms in America, there is an issue, but it's not to the extent how it's polarized in the media.
So let's hear another take on that. D Black, what's your take?
So I don't know. When it comes to it's interesting because I feel like most people would think that I was against it. Possession of firearms. Actually, I'm not. I'm for. I think it's Everyone should have the right to bear arms. It's an amendment. I mean, it is what it is, and it's a personal choice, right? But I think one thing that really needs to be assessed is just the individuals, right? Like we need a better way to assess the individuals. Just from personal experience, let me tell you a story because I think like Chunky touched on a very important point: self-defense. Like just put that in brackets and we just focus on that self-defense, right? Because I feel like, you know, what an individual perceives as threatening is subjective from person to person.
Mm-hmm.
Prime example, like I mean, I've lived in a lot of southern states where, you know, areas have been, I mean, it's because of like the work that I do, been in a lot of areas where there's not a lot of minorities. And like prime example, I was just like I went to a hotel because I was working in this area, and I went to I went to a Walmart, and in this state it's open carry laws, whatever. And this gentleman was standing there. I was just literally just in the aisle. I was in a suit and tie with a briefcase, and this man literally still, even with that situation, he literally looked at me, touched his firearm, and then kind of was like just staring at me, looking at what he's doing. Mind you, what was I doing that was threatening in that situation? What could I possibly be doing that was threatening in that situation? You know, but he still, from my perception, he seemed as if he wanted to let me know that he has a weapon and he's willing to use it. And I feel like because of the fact that there's always, it comes down to, again, I mean, we got to take it on a case by case basis. I fully understand that. But I feel like people use that amendment not necessarily for, again, self-defense, but as a justification for armament, you know, like to armor themselves for whatever impending situation and use it as a tool to threaten other people.
So you see in a way that it's being used as provocation in a sense, or as in a way to deter potential threats, which where there may not even be any, right? It could just be simply, I think you're a threat because you're a black man in a suit. And, you know, but I mean, if we take a look at the amendment, and we'll get another take on this, it says word for word, and the reason we didn't get into it because the meaning of it's not really self-evident, some could say, but a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Well, when you see the Second Amendment, a lot of people just cut right to the end, right? The right to bear arms, but they forget everything that comes before. So with that in mind, the purpose, seeing that we do have a well-regulated militia, probably one of the most powerful in the world. Dre, what's your take on civilian gun ownership? And if it's
I think I have I know I have a very I have a unique, I guess, take on this. I know Chunky and I have this conversation, debate, whatever you want to call it, quite often. Would I say that it's a problem in America?
Or civilian gun ownership?
Yeah, for civilian gun ownership, I would say that if I had to say, is it a problem or is it not a problem? Yes, I would say it is a problem. I think that it's a problem only or one of the factors of it being a problem is just like how drastically different all the laws are everywhere. And I know Chunky explained a really good example of where in New York City, where, where upper, New York State, the upper part, Rochester versus New York City. But I guess the thing, and again, I'm looking at this from like a civilian standpoint, right? I've never fired a gun before. I've never even seen a gun in real life before, right? Like I'm like completely, right? I've only seen guns on TV, right? So from my side, I think that the problem is that we have different laws in every state. And like with all things, there are examples where people are legally using guns to kill people, and there are other examples of people using guns illegally to kill people. So I really believe that there should be some more common sense across the board, laws put in place, controls put in place. I have like this analogy where I say that it should be like owning a driver's license. To me, it's so crazy to me that it's like different, whereas, I can drive my car legally in California and I can drive all the way to New York State, and my license, affords me the right to drive on the road across all of those states. But it just seems to me that this is one of those things where there should be some better controls in place around gun ownership. And to the point of where you were talking about with the militia, I always think that is like the most ridiculous thing, that people like, oh, I want to have my gun to secure. And I'm like, dog, if the military decides to run down on you, whatever guns you have are not even going to come close. They won't even need to come. They send a drone to your house or wherever you're at. So that whole, I understand why it was in place when they wrote that amendment. But to me, whenever someone brings up that thing, it's the most ridiculous thing to me, because I'm just thinking, like, whatever guns you have, the military has that in like, they have that in like whatever you have, like whatever firepower you think you have, they have in a very small compartment. Like you wouldn't even be able, it's like a fly or whatever. So I know we'll talk about that later, but that part I gotta admit.
I mean, I think I'm glad you cited that out. Like I hear what you're saying on that, Glenn, but like Dre just said, like there was a reason why that was written at that point in time, and it's not really applicable to now, which was discussed because the U.S. has its own military, right? So I think that's a moot point when that's brought up, and I wouldn't really hone in and focus on that, because everyone understands that even if you create your own militia, and we've seen it during the past 4 years, how
Proud Boys,
how some came out and it's just not good, right? It just doesn't logically compute and make sense.
So I think that could also speak to our Constitution as a whole. We look at the Bill of Rights, and I mean, potentially that could open up the possibility, like, hey, this is no longer relevant. Do we need to possibly look at amending our Constitution to take a look at some of the problems that we experience on the day-to-day? And essentially that being one of the functions of our Supreme Court justices. So I would say on that point, let's direct this to Francis. Do you feel that gun ownership reform or restrictions around gun control are needed in America? Essentially, if you also feel there's an issue with civilian gun use.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, because I mean, the U.S. is the only country that doesn't have any restriction or limitation on their constitution regarding firearms. So I definitely think we should have some limitation around that. I mean, like one thing that I've noticed, it's like we have so many guns out here, is just insane. I mean, the U.S., like we make up like less than 5% of the population, but we own almost 50% of the guns in the world. It's like, why do we need so many guns?
It's America, that's why.
I know, yeah, we so self-centered. We think why are we so self-centered, bro? Yeah, like we make our own rules. We're like, we need all these guns. I mean, like just like Drake, I've never shot a gun in my life.
I highly
was on my objective for last year, but COVID messed that up. So I'm gonna try again.
I got you
to do it. So I'm not gonna act like I'm an expert, but I do think there should be some limitation. I'm not trying to take guns out of people's hands, because the primary reason why people say they need guns is to protect their family. So, and about 31% of household already has it, so might as well make it 100% or whoever choose to have it.
Like everybody.
Like everybody. It's either we all have it or none of us have it.
No, I think that's extreme, honestly. And I stand on the opposite side of it. I hear you, right? And you called it out in the beginning of this. Like I'm going to be on the opposite side for what I know and what I understand. And I appreciate your insight on it, right? So you're saying you're not trying to take guns out of people's hands.
I'm not.
So the thing is, it's just like, yeah, if you want to own a gun, and if every household has a gun, it. Like you purchase a house, here's a shotgun. That's it.
Yeah, but I have a caveat to that rule though. So this is what I was thinking. I'm not sure how realistic this is. Maybe I'm just being like, I guess maybe too naive. But I think if the primary reason for us to have a gun is to protect our family, like the story that I shared, that is a perfect example for me to have a gun. So that's why I don't oppose to the idea of having a gun. But I don't think nobody should be able to take it outside of their home. That is what I think, except for...
That's an interesting dynamic.
Except for the people who actually are permitted to have it, should have the gun outside, but this should,
Okay,
but
okay,
everyone
let's-
can have a gun in the home.
Let's go ahead, Chunky. I know you're itching. Go ahead.
I know I'm about to jump through this microphone, and it's all out of love, right? So there are other reasons like why you shoot a gun, and shooting a gun is actually a skill. It's an art. It's a perishable skill. So if you shoot today, you don't shoot again for 9 months from now, you're not going to be as proficient. If you shoot every other month or shoot every month, it's kind of like a good skill to have, right? And for me personally, I don't own weapons to antagonize someone or get someone into a fight with me so I can use it. It's like, all right, cool. I'm going to go to the range. I'm going to shoot my 100 to 150 rounds of my pistol. It feels good. It's relaxing. I understand the power in which I grasp in my hands. And like it was mentioned before, I think Dre, like every state is different, right? So Georgia's open carry, right? I know Washington State's open carry and insert state here is open carry. So they agreed amongst themselves that this isn't an issue. I know down in Portland, you're able, I think, to carry like an assault rifle as long as the magazine is not in it. And people are comfortable with that. And that's just society saying that I'm fine with this. This is not an issue. You're free to do that. And I don't see the harm. But if someone in New York City does that, all hell's gonna break loose. And to throw something on top of that, I look at gun ownership and then black gun ownership, right? And I think those are two different.
We'll get to that though. We'll get to that. It's a good point, Chunky, but we'll get to that. But D Black, then Dre. Like you had a point there, D.
All right. So you said that like every like 9 weeks or something, you have to.
No, I said. No, yeah, go ahead. It wasn't 9. It was like 9 months. Just like
okay.
It was just
every
an
9 months, right? So it's an essential skill that you kind of have to hone, right? That is important that you continue to work at it, so that way you have a proficient skill. It's essential. It's basically an essential skill to have, right?
Yes.
Okay. When was the last time you cooked?
Like last week.
Okay. When was the last time before that?
Okay.
But isn't cooking an essential skill to staying alive?
Not necessarily, because I can order food.
Okay, then all right, fine. If that's your argument, then if you can easily order food, then you can easily have police provide you protection as well, right?
So
there's other forms of protection, right?
So okay. Can I respond to that, or
Yeah,
is
go
it
ahead.
Wait.
I'm just having a conversation.
Okay. Let's hear Dre's point real quick first, because I know Dre had some data on, or at least he had some information on. You know, we're all on the idea that guns protect your family, but in some cases where guns were used within the home, or more proponents for violence as well. I'm not sure you're going to lead into that. I'll get the stats on that, but I think you had a point as far as guns in the home.
Yeah, I think my only thing I was gonna say is I'm just looking at this in like a realistic box. America was founded, basically we took over this country in a certain way. Guns are always going to be a part of the fabric of being America. So to me, I just think I can't think about it as removing guns from people, because I don't think that's a realistic thing that's going to happen in our lifetimes. And to me, if you're going to have a gun, I think I think we just need to put things in place to make sure that people as many responsible people as possible have the right to own a gun. So I think that Francis, probably to your point of like it only be in the house, there could probably be a time where like you're in the car with your family and you need to protect your family, right? So I think there's a lot of use cases where having a gun on your person outside of your home could still be used to protect your family or whatever. So
well, I mean, in an ideal state, those people shouldn't have a gun either, except for. But I understand that it's not.
It's a slippery slope. You know, it's a very slippery slope. That's why I'm just looking at it like black and white. Like it's a right, similar to I have a right to drive a car. I have certain parameters in place. I have to apply for a license every year to own this, to be able to drive a car. I have to wear glasses to wear this car, to drive this car. You know what I mean? Like, so to me, I just don't understand why there isn't a very simple frame for gun ownership in America. I know there just, and again, I'm just like Joe Blow here, but to me, from what I understand, and Chunky, please correct me if I'm wrong, basically you apply for the gun license, but you're not like renewing the gun license. There's no like, basically once you have the gun, right? You're not needing to renew a license unless you're moving out of state or whatever, correct?
So so when you purchase a handgun, you get your handgun permit, right? And that goes through whatever process of that state.
Yeah.
Now you have a concealed carry permit, you do have to renew that. And that's not, it's not reciprocity in every state. So if I get in New Jersey, it doesn't mean I can use the same thing in Florida. So I agree, there is a frame, there is a federal frame that says who can and cannot own weapons. And it's laid out. Does every state follow that? Then that's a discussion separately, right? And I hear you on that. It should just be that frame. Like if you know, if you're mentally insane and you're not mentally competent, you shouldn't own a firearm, period, right? And that's one of the things. But let's say that person gets it or becomes mentally unstable while owning that firearm. So that's where that slippery slope comes into place, and it's hard to take that weapon out of someone's hand unless they show that, and legally you can actually take that weapon from them. Like you're a danger to society, so we have to get this weapon away from you to better help yourself if you're suicidal or if you're in a bad state of mind. So that's another level of responsibility where like, hey, I'm not feeling it today. And I've seen this happen before. People just turn in their firearm like, hey, like I think I'm going to cause harm to myself or someone else. Please take this away from me. And that's a huge responsibility when someone's owning a firearm.
Okay, so let's revisit that point then. As far as I believe you and D Black were going in on essential skills and having to hone that skill, and D Black was using the analogy of cooking. So let's revisit that point.
He was saying police, right? So I think that's where we left off. So that's sometimes reactionary, right? So if let's use me and Francis, for example. So I get into a fender bender with Francis. We both hop out our cars. I'm like, hey, bro, you're right. And Francis is just irate. He's like, F you, you're POS. You know, I'm going to murder you in your entire face. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, I mean, I take that as a threat. So I'm going to defend myself in that moment. Now, like you said, everyone sees the threat differently. And if Francis starts coming at me, if I have a firearm I can still carry, my immediate thought isn't to call 911. My immediate thought in that moment is to defend myself because this person is actively trying to take my life. So I'm going to defend myself. And if I have, you know, a wife and kid in the car, I'm going to defend them too, right? So I'm not going to get my face smashed in. I'm not going to curl up in a ball and get beat up. I'm going to protect myself. And that's in that instance. So when you talk about policing, sometimes it's reactive, and that's just the means of the situation. So I'm not taking anything away from police officers, but they're not always on the spot all the time. They're not right there when something happens.
Yeah, and I understand that, but I think I'm not, and I mean, I do agree that, like obviously sometimes, I mean, different departments have different response times. Obviously, you're not necessarily right next to an officer, somebody about to kill you, you ain't gonna be like, hold up, let's run to the police station real quick. Hold on, give me a few minutes. And like, obviously, I get that, and I'm not saying
I'll
that.
State Farm.
So Jake shows up. Like, but my point is, I just feel like that the reason why I brought up the food analogy is because I feel like we equate, weapons, or I should say firearms specifically, as an essential of life. And I don't agree with that at all. I don't feel like you absolutely need it in order to live your life. Like, I mean, not taking shots at Chunky, but you just pointed out a point. You just made you created you helped me develop my point by saying, like, okay, you don't even feel like you have to hone the skill of cooking every day or preparing a meal, and mind you, if you don't nourish yourself, you will die, regardless of how you feel about cooking. If Uber Eats shut down, if everything shut down, all the stores shut down, if you don't know how to hone that skill of providing nourishment for yourself, you will die. But if you don't hone that skill in that 9 months period of that firearm, will you die? It depends on, obviously, life takes its crazy turns, but in an ideal sense, you'll live on. And I feel like that's where we get carried away, is that we apply it because, again, like my cousin said, only country that we have it in our constitution, we absolutely require that you have to have the firearm. But I think that we need to take it, in my opinion, I feel like it should be removed from that area because you don't need it to survive. I mean, again, we have people, and I think the main thing, I'm gonna let you go, Chunky, but I think and the reason why I brought up my story, and I agree with having firearms because I believe everyone's situation is different. I believe there should be more rules and regulations around it to enforce, people's competency and make sure the right people have it and the right people don't. But there are people using the word self-defense, and then they're building up armies.
Zimmerman.
Like Boogaloo Boys crazy right now.
So, I mean, we can even take a look at one quick, I know we're getting on this one a bit, but the idea of self-defense, I just wanted to throw in there. Like, for instance, the idea of calling the authorities as well, and then the idea of self-defense and perceived threats, right? Like, for instance, we take a look at Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin. We understand from that shooting that Zimmerman felt that he was being threatened. That was what was in the transcript or in the record. He shot at this young man because he felt like he was a threat. There was a cases of break-ins happening within this community. He was upset about it. He saw him, basically profiled him. I believe they got into a scuffle, and then he shot him afterwards. And mind you, this young man was unarmed. And as far as we understand, he was minding his business. So does that say anything about our ability to perceive threats and handle threats, and necessarily using a gun to solve the problem as well? Like, why is it that it seems to be our number one solution for gun owners in this country?
It's not. So I'm gonna be 100% clear. Like, what the and it's not personal against you, but I'm very like passionate about the situation, right? So I completely agree when it came down to Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin. It's a up situation, and that perception of threat isn't accurate. It went to the court, and a jury of the peers pretty much acquitted him, right? So that's a separate problem of its fucking self, right? So I don't believe like I have to own a weapon to handle situations. So I am a gun owner. So I kind of take that on a personal front, not you attacking me, but trying to explain like, yes, like I said before, when I get into an altercation and I'm carrying, my first thought isn't to use my firearm. My first thought is to de-escalate the situation. Whether that person's armed or not, that's not what I'm thinking. What I'm thinking is just like, there has to be a egregious reason why I have to take this individual's life, right? No matter how mad I am, that's my final step. So owning that firearm, to me, it's a safety mechanism. I'm in a situation where, someone pulls out a knife. How often does that happen? Not really often. It's not that I'm thinking like I'm going to be under attack, I'm under siege all day long, but it's just like I have this weapon. And to clarify the 9 months thing, what I was trying to say is that if you shoot every 9 months, you're not going to be proficient. And my recommendation is to shoot like at least every month to have that proficiency, right? And I don't equate it to cooking, because I can go on YouTube or I can figure it out on how to cook a certain meal. But shooting itself, it's such a fine art and skill that you have to do it yourself. You can watch a whole bunch of videos, but that doesn't mean you're going to be a great shot. There are certain recipes that you can follow down to the T, and that meal will come out as good as it's portrayed. So when owning a firearm, there's a hell of a lot of responsibility, and I don't want that to be misunderstood. I have to be always in the correct mental state when I'm in an altercation. I have to understand what I'm wielding, and I have to understand the person across from me, in the sense that if I take this person's life, that's a brother, a sister, an aunt, an uncle, a family member to somebody else. So I'm not going to do that. And I probably stand on a side of the fence that's a small minority of people that understand what it's like to own a firearm and to be hella responsible. When you look at gun reform, I look at it in the sense that it just should be just restructured, right? Stop polarizing it in the sense that, oh, well, people shouldn't own firearms. It should be in the sense that, we have to look at it like, okay, what is the actual issue here? What is the actual problem? How do we fix that problem, in the sense that, all right, you own a firearm, let's sit down and talk to you about it. How do you feel that you should do, or how you should handle situations with that firearm? Not take the craziest person. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to shoot everything and everyone if it comes across my face. But the person that's actually reasonable and responsible, those are the people I suggest you sit down and talk to. The people that have a clear understanding what it's like to have a weapon on your hip consistently.
Yeah, but you're a model gun owner, okay? But we know not everybody's going to be a model gun owner.
I understand.
And then for that, and here's the thing: even if we take a room and we put 1,000 model gun owners in there, and we put that 1,001 person who's not a model gun owner, and let's just pick a easy, like a Glock 45 or something simple. The amount of damage that they can cause being a non-model gun owner, being irresponsible, misreading the situation. I feel like that's where my argument comes, because I feel like every gun owner that is a model gun owner, they feel like they don't realize that they're ultimately arguing for the people who are less responsible. You're making an argument for them, because now you're justifying why they should still be armed too. You guys are not all in the same category. I don't think that's the case.
I agree. But
there should be a delineation, a better way of assessing. There's people who are like their first attempt at addressing the situation is escalated to a firearm. And I feel like that is constantly happening. And we're not really addressing that situation because the first thing we do is like, oh, they're trying to take away my guns. It shouldn't be that.
Yep.
All right. So let's actually move to a next point then, I guess, speaking on, and one point that was brought up was as far as, law enforcement. I think we've seen historically that law enforcement in particular hasn't always been on the side of people of color, as we are usually the victims of, poor law enforcement. But with that in mind, looking at the overwhelming number of white male gun owners compared to that of Black or minority gun owners, does that suggest to anyone in this group that there's perhaps an imbalance or an equity towards the minority gun owners, or there's not really a fair chance for Black people or people of color to actually become legal gun owners? And I'll direct that one over to Dre.
Well, I think the numbers are always going to be until there are more Black people. I think it doesn't shock me that more white people are gun owners, right? There's more white people in America, right? So just the onside of that, kind of does make sense to me. I mean, there are, yeah, I mean, I wonder if some of the I'll just put myself in the situation, right? I personally have not owned a gun because I'm scared about like if being in a situation where like I would be in a situation where like, let's just say if the cops needed to come to my house for some reason and they knew that I had a gun in my house, like, you know what I mean? So just for me, I would say a lot of my hesitancy with getting a gun has just been that, like, just worry about like I'm now potentially going to be in a situation where I could be in close proximity to a police officer or someone knowing that I have a gun and it being, a potentially deadly situation. So I do wonder if for some Black people that is a valid fear that they have, is that they don't want to potentially be in those type of situations. I know that there are also a bunch of other factors in place with gun ownership. With different laws that are in place and things like that may do that. But just kind of speaking from an ignorant standpoint, I wonder if that number is the way it is partially because of just the like, why would you put yourself in a situation that you don't need to be in, right? That's just my initial thought when I hear those numbers.
Idea that there's also a sense of profiling for a legal gun owner, because in the same sense, yes, there are more white people in this country, but however, there are Blacks dying twice the rate of whites as a result of gun violence. So I guess getting to that point, as far as they're presenting a sense of unfairness or profiling a sense of Blacks being gun owners or people of color, I think, Francis, you had a point you wanted to make there.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking that, it's just kind of like one of those, reality we like the outcry from our nation for equality, and it's just kind of like just hope that, with the amount of pressure that's been placed from the community, that we can get to a level playing field, but that might be, like I said earlier, a naive viewpoint, but you have to just like, I mean, for example, I know one of the limitation that was talked about is maybe increasing the cost of Glocks and stuff like that, like increasing the cost of I mean, some of the recommendation I've heard is increasing cost of guns and making it harder to obtain. And I think in some of the negative side of that is the people of color, minorities, especially Black people, overall will be impacted by that potentially. So we have to be mindful of some of the limitation that we put in place for gun restriction limitations and stuff like that, because we have to think about the broader scope of things and how it impacts across the spectrum of people. So to kind of I guess answer your question, we just have to be more mindful about that. I mean, it's just one of those things, like I talked about earlier. When I see a cop driving behind me, I have to take my hat off. It's unfortunate that we have to live with that trauma, and where our counterpart don't have to. And we just have to be more mindful of how we do that.
So to speak on that, right? So being a person, being a black gun owner, I lived through that fear, right?
right.
So being pulled over while being black is already dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And we already seen black men who were pulled over who legally are owning their firearms, and the end result of that. It's unfortunate that we have to de-escalate the situation while properly doing the right thing by law, right? I present, here's my driver's license, here's my concealed carry permit, my firearms either on a hip or on a dashboard or wherever I decide to place it in a readily accessible area. To go on your point, Francis, like increasing the price of guns, it doesn't help, right? So that deters people and forces people, or people may think I might as well buy a gun illegally or get an illegal gun.
Yeah.
So if you reduce the price or keep the prices the same, and you have better avenues and control mechanisms, in the sense that if you purchase this firearm, I guess I'm the only person in the group that owns one. Like, they have a trace of your firearm, right? I have to purchase this firearm. I go down to the local police station. I hand in my firearm permit, and it tells them who I am, and they have me on file. So if I was to discharge that firearm, or someone that I know is using that firearm discharged it, it comes back to me. Every barrel is unique to the firearm. So they're able to trace who owns that. So you have more ability to trace firearms. You have more quote unquote regulation of it, right? People be more mindful before they pull the trigger. Like, if I do this, then I'm liable for what I do. So that forces a level of responsibility on certain people. And going back to D-Black's point, you have the non-model like gun owner. And it's, yeah, and that's a blind spot to me where I defend that individual unknowingly. And I don't mean to do that, but those people need to be spoken to and need to go through the proper training, right? And my resolution to that is that everyone who decides to own a firearm should go through classroom training, for the simple fact that it makes it better and easier to pretty much manage situations. I will always sit on the side as I strongly agree. I strongly feel as though that you should be able to own a firearm no matter who you are. Period. As long as you meet the qualifications of owning it, you should be able to purchase it with no restrictions to purchase, but restrictions of the situation of your background, right? So background checks for every state should be mandatory. One of the loose things that you see is when people buy firearms at gun shows, right? So that should be mandatory at any gun show. You have to have a legit background check. And I'm not ousting any gun show, and I haven't been to all of them, but in the sense that that could be a way of looking at, gun reform, or, restructuring, right? So if you're accountable for what you purchase, you're responsible for what you do.
Right.
So I guess that's a part of the issue too, is the fact that people were able to go to these trade show, gun shows, make these purchases, and basically not be required to kind of fulfill some of these mandates. And I think also a part of the issue could be that guns are going into, there's really not guns that are killing people, it's the people that wield them that's killing people.
Yeah.
So essentially they're going into the hands of the wrong ones. So, even though there is that right, it's really not afforded to everyone, because everyone's not equal as far as mind state and mental stability. That's another take on that potentially.
So here's one thing that I skipped, which I think will be important for you to hone in on, Glenn, because I want to get your take on this. So I own my firearms, and if I decide to pass it down to my child, I legally can do that. I can legally transfer my gun over to you, and you just go in and sign and then put it in. Or if I have historic weapons, right? Let's say I have an M1 Graham from whenever case may be, I can pass it down to you. It's still fully functional. So you're able to use that weapon how you please, and I pass it down as an heirloom. What is your opinion on that?
I think that's also a part of the issue as well, because moreover, we look at some of the cases in last year alone, despite COVID being probably the number one killer, probably not after heart disease, but at the same time, we had about 41,000 deaths related to gun violence last year. And that's probably a number that's overlooked or missed that we're not aware of. But I think that's still an issue, is the idea that, okay, you're passing on this heirloom that's fully functional. If that's the case, then we should probably, if it's just a heirloom, like maybe it has some worth or value, reduce its ability to function as a weapon without this person being able to actually conduct the test, get their background taken, and make sure they're in a mental state, they don't have a history of violence, that could lead potentially more violence in America. And Dre, I think you had a point.
Yeah, I was gonna say the only thing, and I think everyone is probably guilty of this on both sides, right? Is I think sometimes we focus on the illegal. Basically, we're focused on people illegally getting guns, right? When there are examples of people who have legal guns who are killing people, right? And there's examples of people who got guns legally who kill people, right? It's like this weird thing where I think sometimes this argument gets like pushed to like one of those extremes where it's like, all the people who die as a result of gun violence are buying them because of this like weird loophole that they have at the gun shows, right? And they almost like forget that there are people who basically people who use guns who legally got them, who have all the proper licenses and permits and all that stuff. But just as again, me being someone who's like completely green to this, when I see a school shooting, my brain doesn't think with, I don't sit in reality, right? My brain goes to that extreme of like, well, why does someone need a gun like an AR-15? You know what I mean? And I know that there are examples of people who have handguns who can kill more people than the AR-15, but just again, optics of it, right? Me being like, I would say that minus you, Chunky, probably the rest of us on this podcast are more of like the quote unquote what America is, right? As far as like expertise and guns and knowledge and all that stuff, right? So you have to understand from our perspective, if we see multiple instances of someone using a specific type of weapon to kill people, I think we have to be very mindful that it's a logical step that people are gonna want to be like, we should just get rid of all AR-15s, right? And again, I know people throw all the different examples like, oh, people can like kill a bunch of people with a car or whatever, but like that's not what the matter at hand is, right? If you see kids being killed as a result of a gun, right? It just mentally, right, as people who are not familiar with guns, right, who are not in that world, that's where our brains go to, right? Like why would someone need an AR-15? I can't understand it, right? I've never shot an AR-15, right? So that I just think we just need to also be mindful of that piece as well. Like I think it's a very understandable leap that some people make when it comes to guns because it just doesn't make sense.
Said it's a leap, right? So I implore everyone who's listening to this, just do your research on weapons, like full out research on firearms. Do not look up things that side with what you believe or what you think. The way to fix this is honestly coming to the table, knowing what you need to know. And that's on both sides of the fence. I completely understand where you're coming from, Dre, and everyone else on the podcast. And I don't disagree with you, but knowing both sides of the fence, you're able to pitch an idea that's actually resolving the situation, right? And the thing may not be, take away every AR-15, reduce magazine capacity to 4 rounds in every handgun. Like that may not be the way to do it, but don't polarize the event. Look at it. It's horrible. It's horrific, and I don't agree with it. But what I am saying is that sit down and really look at why AR-15s were designed, why AR-10s were designed, and the reason why we have the ability to own long arms, right? It may be someone defending, their livestock. It may be someone who is just a recreational shooter who says, I'm taking this gun from my house, locked up in my vehicle, to the range, shoot a couple of rounds, bring it back home, and it sits on the shelf. And that's it. And it's nothing more than that. I'm not thinking in my head to use it as a means of ability to kill a mass amount of people.
But what weapon does a typical cop usually have? Isn't that like a 9mm? Like your typical, police officer, squatty.
It's gonna be a form of handgun regardless, right?
So why is it that a civilian can have a more powerful weapon than a cop that's licensed, trained to kind of handle these situations? How is it that a cop is able to be outgunned by a civilian?
Damn. So police officers do have rifles, right? And you get trained on that rifle. I don't know, like there are pictures out there, and you've seen the worst case scenarios where I know the other complaint was that why does law enforcement have tactical gear and AR-10s and AR-15s and sniper rifles and stuff like that? And that's to the point, like what you just said. If a average civilian can own a powerful weapon, then the police should own a weapon that's just as powerful to defend other people.
Yeah, I agree.
And just think about it. Like, how would you feel if you walked outside the house and you see a police officer on patrol in the middle of the summer carrying an AR-15? It makes you think like, oh, well, am I in a dangerous setting? Different from a police officer just carrying a handgun, right? So it's also that optics. And once again, I refer back to, everyone just do their research on firearms and understand that it's not to be a presented threat to you or make you feel uncomfortable. It can be used as a means of protection. So, like I said, I think, well, I know that people of an average capacity have the ability to own an AR-10, AR-15, assault rifle, or a shotgun. That's just in the Constitution, and I don't have an issue with that. The type of mentality that person has owning that weapon is where I say there is a gun problem, right? If someone owns that weapon and they're not mentally stable and is shown instability through one social media source or just outright in reality, that person should have a hard thing be looked at. Like they need to be honed in on like this can be a perceived problem later on down the line.
Gotcha. So how do you...
I do have a question for you. I mean, like that. I mean, now that we know, like, like it's more likely if you have a gun around, you're more likely something is more likely to happen. Especially like maybe in an abusive relationship, the wife is maybe like 5 times or more likely to be assaulted with guns. So I mean, what do you think? And another interesting stat I actually saw was like almost about 60% of gun deaths is actually due to suicide. So I mean, what would you say to people who are saying we shouldn't have guns around? Like, I mean, what is your view on that?
So I'm just gonna open up. Like my heart goes out to people who have been in negative situations with firearms. Just like Glenn had the disclaimer in the beginning. So this doesn't take away from them or their situations. It's horrible stats to look at, right? And it's a horrible situation. And it's all about your mental capacity, right? It's all about how you feel in that moment. It's unfortunate that in domestic violence situations, like correct me if I'm wrong, you point out that it's more likely like people who own firearms actually use it against like their significant other.
Exactly, against their
it's bad, but like if they don't have a firearm, they may use a different type of weapon, right? And they're in the heat of the moment. It's a crime of passion, and they may stab them. There's been stabbings of parents and of significant others because they want to do harm to somebody. I wouldn't focus on the firearm piece. A firearm is an easier method to use against someone rather than a knife or a bat, right? So I wouldn't take that away from someone. Like I said, it's that mental stability that has to be looked at. If there's something lengthy off with that person should go get checked out. And there's nothing against that individual. It's just the better wealth of society, right? The better health of society, of getting yourself mentally checked out to figure out your issues and problems. It may not be best for you in that moment to own that firearm for the next couple of months or ever again. Yeah. But I wouldn't take that away from people because now you're singling people out. And I don't think that's fair or that's right.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, no, I definitely agree with. I mean, that's at least when I was thinking about if I was for guns in the household or not for it. That was the other side of it I was thinking about. Like, if the gun is in the household, there's more likely something bad to happen in the household. So potentially, at least that's if you want to look at it from the other side. I'm sure there's different reasons why.
I look at you as a very competent and responsible individual, right? So I believe you can own a firearm in your household and not use it against your spouse. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, yeah, but
so, let's take a look at, as far as we took a look at, let's say, Sandy Hook, Stoneman Douglas shootings taking place in our institutions that we would normally consider peaceful, what you wouldn't expect, and obviously usually being the most devastating. And the idea that, well, basically we could have combated shooters with armed guards in our schools, in our peaceful institutions, in our churches. Remember that church shooting that took place. How do you guys feel about that? Is the solution combating guns with more guns, or guns in the hands of teachers and security guards in our churches and in our schools? What are your guys' thoughts on that dialogue? And I'll direct this one to D Black to start.
Like I said, I think that if everyone has the right to a firearm, then especially like teachers, people who are responsible for protecting people that really can't protect themselves, I think they need to be armed. They gotta be armed too. But again, I think for me, the main issue always kind of comes down to making sure we properly assess the individuals who are going to be put in those positions, right? I mean, even without arms, we have teachers making bad decisions. We got ministers and all these people making bad decisions. And even though and it's funny that we say that because they make poor social decisions, but they don't necessarily impact laws, or they're not breaking any laws, but they made some poor social decisions. So in a sense, when they would qualify for a firearm, right? So more needs to be done to really assess who is going to be in possession of those weapons. But I mean, I do think that, again, having the right people, just kind of the same thing we're talking about, like we were, I know we're on sidebar having like police reform conversations and all those things, making sure we have the right people in place. Just actually kind of like a real funny story is it's actually kind of not that funny, but there was one guy that I knew that I used to work with in this one laboratory setting. Like, he always wanted to be a state trooper. He would just kind of brag about how he used to always go hunting with his dad, and like he was like a crazy great shot and all these type of things. But this man he was really, really rowdy, and he was not always making the best decisions at work. And it's funny because he would like go through all these he would always like get high grades on like the weapons section and all the other like written tests and everything about like the history of the state troopers. But then when it came to the mental assessment, he would constantly fail, and he would constantly try to push through and try to see if he had connects to kind of get in. But mind you, for the weapon assessment, he would always pass, get the highest marks, but he did not have the cognitive standpoint to get into the state troopers. Obviously, he never got in. I think that was a great thing, but it just is crazy that if he somehow, and he's like, apparently he just barely passed the mark. So somebody like him, if he was able to pass the mark and get into the state troopers, and his affinity for weapons was honestly, he felt like he would have more access to certain weapons. Like, that was like, for me, that would be very concerning, right? And now, mind you, this is a state trooper. Now, as an average civilian, if he has a crazy amount of weapons on his own, right? So, it just shows me that that the civilian has the ability to, even though this person doesn't have like the mental capacity based on the state troopers to truly be in that position, guarding people with firearms, making these type of decisions, he has the ability to do it on his own. And that's where like the questions always come from me. And I feel like the one thing, like, again, I don't necessarily think that the problem is the firearms. I'll constantly say that. I think it's just that because of the level of consequence, if the firearm is misused and put in the hands of that 1,001 person who makes poor decisions, there's no coming back from most of those situations. It's always letters to family, grieving people on TV, and then we have these conversations talking about reform that don't always go anywhere. So that's kind of my point.
Okay. I'll say lead that over to Chunky if any other point on that. As far as institutionalizing the weapons or using them in schools and churches to potentially combat, armed assailants.
That's because when I think about it, it's hurtful, right? To think of those situations and who it's happened to. And I do want the best possible outcome and thwarting a person who's willing to cause harm to somebody. I don't think it's a good idea to arm teachers, but if a teacher volunteers to do so, then that's their choice, right? If they feel as though they want to protect their students and the faculty that way, then I think they should be able to. Do I think everyone should be armed to the teeth to combat against it? No. D Black had a very important point, is that cognitive ability, right? And if we focus on that cognitive ability of people, I think we'll come to a better resolution than polarizing in the sense that it's guns against guns, stronger people against the strongest people. That's how you fix it, is to think about someone's mentality or the greater mentality of the United States. And to me, that's the resolution. Like I appreciate everyone's insight on guns in this podcast, right? Because we're able to come to the table and have an actual meaningful discussion and not take it personally. Even though I had my little like point where like I was like, yo, fuck this. It was just me releasing that and then moving forward saying, all right, here's the logic behind the way that I feel or how I think. And everyone agreed to it. And I agreed to what everyone else is saying right now. It can be resolved, but as a wise person once said to me, cooler minds prevail.
Facts. So that'll actually lead into our wrapping point, where I'll pose this question to the group in its entirety, where we take a look at gun violence and just the prevalence of it in America. Is this any way related to perhaps a normalization of violence as a whole, in the sense that we are just an inherently more violent nature? We are constituted of more violent people, and the acceptance of it. And I'll direct that question over to Francis to start.
Man, yeah, I do think, we all love action movies. And I think we see guns and shootings and, even the show Cops that was on TV for a long time. We enjoy the rush. So honestly, when I was looking at the numbers of shooting, I thought it was actually deaths from guns. I thought it was higher. And when I was looking at it initially, I was like, oh, it's actually not that bad. So I know it's not actually funny, but I think sometimes we already are numb to it. We see it on the news every day and every second. So in a way, I feel like we are kind of used to it. It's normalized now. So which is just part of our day to day, and we have to get away from that, I think so. And the only way to do that is actually implementing some of the stuff we talked about today. And I think just restricting some of those the way people get guns, but we're not trying to take guns out of people's hands, but kind of limiting the process of it
Right,
from a federal level. Sorry, go ahead.
Dre, you have a take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think in some ways, sadly, we have kind of normalized gun violence. And I think that normally what happens is, shooting happens. Everyone's really upset about it. Everyone's, screaming, we need gun reform, we need whatever. And then basically people don't keep that same energy. And basically it's just kind of an endless cycle, it seems like. It often seems like when people are screaming the loudest about things changing, it doesn't seem like enough does change. And I think as a result of it, we are kind of desensitized to some of it. Without throwing Glenn into the bus, there was a video that was shared in the group chat that I was not. It definitely made me very. I was not desensitized to it because it was a very raw video of basically a dispute between some people, and I'm assuming that guy was a legal gun owner, and he definitely did not use his gun. He was definitely not thinking in a smaller, but so there are instances like that where I'm like, okay, maybe we're not so desensitized, right? I saw that video and I had like a really guttural, I was like, why did you share this in the group chat? Because I was just so shy. I think he made the mistake of showing the video and then a couple beats later, just writing oh, graphic or whatever. And I'm like, yo, you're supposed to put graphic first before the video. Okay, so yeah, I don't think I think we are desensitized to it, and I think that that our outrage or whatever is always very limited. So that, which is a sad, unfortunate thing. But unfortunately, I think that's kind of how we are about it.
All right, we'll go to D, wrap up with Chunks.
Yeah, I think that I think the more we expose ourselves to certain things, we always desensitize ourselves to it. We watch horror movies, we get this, this person got his head cut off in a certain way in the other movie, so it's not so bad. or scary clowns or people getting murdered left and right. Because of the fact that we constantly expose ourselves to it, I mean, that's honestly the bad part. I know there's plenty of good, but the bad part of the internet and having everything being so accessible, again, it really becomes like we do become somewhat numb to it. Um, I think the main thing that kind of going back to what Dre says is like I mean, I do believe you got to keep that energy. If you feel like you're passionate about it and you really want to see change, I think it's really important that you continue to push that topic. You know, talk to your representatives. Um, you know, write a letter to your senator. Like, reach out to people and really try to push to make that change. I think it's unfortunate because life is very busy. We're all kind of get caught up in so much things that we tend to forget until it happens to us, and then we get caught up in it, or happens to someone close to us, and then we're gonna become the advocate because we're living that story too. So if you feel passionate about it and you see change, you want change, really keep on top of it. And then the last part I'm gonna say before I pass the chunk is I think the agenda of the state, the agenda that's always getting perpetuated is that we want to take away guns from everyone, or people, or that the mission is to take away guns from everyone. I think it really should be a coming to the table. Like I said, we have model gun owners, that people who are smart, competent, and capable of being responsible. We have people who are obviously responsible as well, but they don't want to have guns. But there should be a conversation on how to better address those people in the middle that are not necessarily truly competent, but then they're still arming themselves to the teeth. Like, how to handle that and better regulate so that they are not, they're not able to, put themselves in situations where they're causing, catastrophe to others.
All right. And Chunky.
Oh, you were fucking wrong. Be honest, D Black just took the words out of my mouth, right? And I agree with everything that he's saying. The other thing I would add in there is oversight, right? So you have to have oversight of how guns are purchased, how situations that go to court dealing with guns are being handled, and you have to be able to educate the public on gun ownership or just firearms in general.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that we are desensitized to gun violence, right? In America, we have the ability to put caps on things or to turn away from things or not acknowledge them. And if someone was to witness someone getting shot in the head right in front of them, their reaction isn't like, "Oh man, I got to get this on film and share it with my friends and just talk about it." It's going to leave a scar on you, one way or another. No matter how many action movies you watch, no matter how many scary movies you watch, it's different when it happens in front of you and you witness it in real time. Um, I can only implore everyone who listens, who's on both sides of the fence, to realistically come together and really resolve this. Um, it is something that we can move forward together as a society and come to an agreement. Over time, things change. So should laws. So should social norms. And with everything that has been happening, there is time for a change and adjustment. You can't leave black gun owners out of the situation or equation either. That's a very important thing to talk about, or any minority who owns a weapon. So please be super mindful of the person next to you that's yelling and screaming about gun ownership and the person across from them yelling and screaming about not owning guns. They may have valid points, but just hear them out. When it comes down to a weapon that deadly, I think the time should be given to really hear someone out, to really focus on what the actual issue is and not focus on things that just are pet peeves of yours.
Mm-hmm.
Some things that may directly affect you may not directly affect the other person, but there's a way to reach that person in the sense of explaining that. So I think we can come together and resolve this, but it's going to take some time.
All right. And that's an awesome take, and truly one conversation out of many, and really just a ripple in the pond. And I would say to that point as well that on behalf of the podcast, myself, that we truly look forward to the day that the ability to coexist peacefully is not considered a privilege, and it's really a right that we're allowed to do. So definitely let's continue this conversation. Feel free to follow us at JJCPod on Instagram and Facebook. And stay tuned for the ending outro for more details on how you can get your business to reach out to us and be featured on the show. Until next time, peace and love. Blessings.
Peace.
And that concludes today's episode, but that doesn't mean the conversation has to end. As a matter of fact, check us out on Instagram or Twitter at JJCPodcast for our post-discussion question. If you're a Black business owner and like to be featured on the show, shoot us an email at jjcpod@gmail.com. Additional details in the description field below. As always, likes, comments, and shares are humbly appreciated. Subscribe to be notified when our next episode releases. But until then, stay blessed. Peace.